Hello, my name is Graham Hughes and I'll be your tutor for this webinar today. Over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to show you a practical demonstration of a method for analysing the responses to open-ended questions which have been asked in an online survey. This program is almost identical on Windows and Mac computers. I'm using Windows myself, but Mac users will find this webinar just as useful. I'll start with some contextual information about survey data because there's very little methodological history of this particular kind of work. Then I'll show you how to prepare the data in Microsoft Excel before importing it live into a new MaxQDA project. Next, I'll show you some techniques for quickly coding the main themes for one question and ways to revise and refine those later, before finishing with illustrations of reporting your results. It's going to be a fairly high-speed ride, so please fasten your seatbelts and prepare to hang on tight. This should be quite exciting. So, in my theory, there's a range of methods that could be used for analysing the responses to open-ended questions, which I abbreviate to OEQs. Some people would like to do this work fully manually, remaining as close as possible to the qualitative paradigm, because it is, after all, qualitative data. Other people might be looking for a fully automated solution where you feed the data into a computer, press the button and go away and drink coffee. Can I just warn you that when you reach that stage, the society will no longer need analysts and you'll be out of a job. So I suggest a kind of hybrid midpoint in this, where we use MaxQDA to help us. In my idea, the people do what people do best, deciding what is important, what is useful, what is interesting, while the computer does what computers do best, counting things, searching for things, and grouping things. Can I suggest also your analysis goals might have an impact on the way you approach the data. For example, if you're looking for explanation and insight, you've asked open-ended questions because you really have got a very open mind and want to know very rich things, then that might lead you more towards the manual end of the spectrum. Whereas if your goal is simply quantification and statistics, and you've asked an open question because you think that's slightly easier than having a closed question where you've got to think up all the response categories before you get any data, well, that would lead you more to the quantitative end. I'm probably pitching this presentation somewhere closer to the quantification end, but not entirely there. The data collection method can also have an impact on the way you analyze the data. For example, if you, in the past, the only way of collecting this data involved interviewers literally transcribing in the interview what they heard the respondents say. Not surprisingly, they tended to paraphrase what they heard, and so they mediated the data and it wasn't as rich. We're asking people in most cases now to self-complete online, but you need to be aware that a certain amount of self-censorship may take place in that situation, because people will be slightly lazy and they won't give you quite as long-winded an answer because that involves lots of typing. It remains that the best data collection method for qualitative data is to record people talking and transcribe that. But that is not going to happen in the survey situation, so we're pretty much restricted to this. But bear in mind, people like to talk much more than they like to type. Thirdly, in my little setup here, the design of your questionnaire can have a bearing on the quality of the data that you collect. Don't think that an online survey is an easy thing to create. There is a huge literature of survey design because for many, many years, very expensive survey data collection has gone on through interviewers. So there's a lot of theory about how to design a good questionnaire, very little of it directly related to the online situation. But let me just draw your attention to a couple of things. If you group your open questions together, particularly at the start of the interview, you'll create a kind of conversation episode in the interview. It'll be likely you'll need to analyze all of those questions as one conversation, not separate questions. Whereas if you spread a few open questions around in a much longer survey instrument, separated by closed questions, then it'll be reasonable to analyze those questions individually, which is what I'm going to demonstrate in this webinar. Strong themes and varied topics can also have a bearing on that. Let me just ask a slightly provocative question while I'm here about survey work. Who does the work of coding in two situations? In the classic interviewer survey, where we ask closed questions, the analyst fixes the categories in advance and puts them onto a show card, which the interviewer shows to the respondent during the interview. And it's the respondent who has to do the coding work. They've got to think of the answer to the question and then decide which of the potential responses they've been offered is closest to their idea. That's coding. If you ask an open question in the way that we're going to look at now, the analyst fixes the categories after he's collected the data, and the coding work is done by the analyst after the interview. In this situation, the analyst codes over and over and over again. They can come back and forth and revisit answers multiple times. Which of these two methods is going to give you more accurate coding, do you think? I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just putting it out there. Something for the purely qualitative analysts to take on board if you're going to go in for this kind of work is that you're used to working in the case by case, or the case perspective. You think about one person, case 1, 2, 3, 4, and you go through all their answers to multiple questions in a structured or semi-structured interview and code and analyze them like that. But our quantitative cousins for years and years have been using what I would call the variable perspective. They work one question at a time. They're just going to take question 31, for example, and they collate all the data from all the different respondents to that one question and think about that one in isolation. In this open-ended questions in a survey, we're going to move closer to this perspective. Quick word about the data I'm going to use in this. It's some fictitious data. I owe some vote of thanks to my former colleagues Anne Lewins and Christina Silver, who developed this partly fictitious data set. The topic is people's views and experiences following the economic crash in 2008. It's collected in the UK, I think probably just in England actually, which has some bearing on the data. You'll pick that up as we go through. It was designed to represent an online questionnaire. It has 191 cases or respondents. They were asked 4 open-ended questions, interspersed amongst 5 demographic and 4 attitudinal variables, so 9 closed questions, and the open questions were spread about so I can analyze them separately. So I'm going to minimize that and look at the data. Here is the actual data I'm going to use for this demonstration. Remember, it is largely fictitious, but whatever survey instrument you use, it's likely to have a means of exporting from the survey instrument into a spreadsheet. Most often, Microsoft Excel is the fairly standard format, so that's what I'm using here. We have a row for each case in this spreadsheet, and we have a column for each variable or each question. So if I just look at case 3, these are some fairly closed questions about their employment and family status. Here is an open question, how were you affected by the economic crash? And another one, have you planned any holidays, and so on. If you have a vital thing for setting up for MaxQDA is that the top row only that should be one row above the data, and this row should only contain identifiers, labels for the various questions, labels that will identify the data. If your program exports these as some numeric code, you'll need to alter them into a language or text that your eyes can read, that makes sense to you. So this one is employment status, this one is about marital status, and this one, question 2, how have you been affected, abbreviated to how affected. So short labels, these actual labels will appear in MaxQDA, and you'll need to manipulate them to identify the data when you want to use it. The first column almost always will naturally contain some kind of identifier. MaxQDA requires these to be unique for each case in your data. So you need to check this first column to make sure there are no duplicates, otherwise your data will get in a muddle. I've just got the heading column personal identifier. Now there is one extra requirement. I need to insert a column in front of this, so I'm going to do it now. And I'm going to call it doc groups. Or doc group, whoops, always difficult to type in a hurry. And I'm going to put in here some data. I'm going to put in the word survey, and then I'm going to copy this, this survey word down 191 times rapidly until I get to the bottom of the it's always difficult to hit the bottom exactly. There we are. That's a necessary requirement for the program for when we bring the data in. And then I should save it and give it a unique name. So I'm just going to call it Downturn Survey Edited Data and save it. Okay, I'm now ready to use it in MaxQDA. So I'm going to close that and open my MaxQDA program, which I'm doing from a desktop icon. As I mentioned, I'm using Windows, but those of you on Mac computers, you'll find almost all of these operations are very, very similar, if not absolutely identical. The MaxQDA program has been made pretty much identical across the two platforms. If you're not familiar with MaxQDA, this is the login screen. You've got a place to identify your username. That's very useful in a team project. I'm going to open a new project from this button here, but you've got links to all kinds of online resources over there when you need them. It asks what I'm going to call it. So I'm going to call it Demo Import OEQs version 1 and save it. So that should give my project a name. And now here we are. Now, I'll just say a brief word for those of you not familiar with MaxQDA. We have menu options across the top, which open up various ribbons, and you'll see me use these as the program goes on. Because I opened a new project which has got no data in, MaxQDA by default goes to the import, because you can't do anything until you've imported some data, so it's offering me the import routine. I'll go through the import and then I'll explain the use of these panels when we've got some data to look at and illustrate. So I'm going for the import survey data, and I'm going to import from an Excel spreadsheet. If you're actually use SurveyMonkey as your data tool, you don't even need to go through the Excel step I've just demonstrated. You can import data direct from SurveyMonkey. So it now asks me to look for the data, and I'm going to pick up this version of it, which I've got edited. No, actually, I've done that wrong. I'm just going to go back, pick that up again. I want to import the survey edited data. So at the top, it's asking me for the column with the document group. It hasn't recognized what I put in because I just called it doc group. If you actually name that first column that I inserted document group, it'll find it. The document name is in the personal identifier. So I recommend that you use document group and document name as the headings for columns A and B in the spreadsheet. But you have to get that step right. Down here, it has identified all of the labels from the top row of the spreadsheet, and it's asking me to confirm, do I want to code this particular column or do I want to treat it as a variable? Code is for the text ones, the open questions. So that's where having a Q question number makes it easy for me to see. Q2, Q3A, Q4A. I'm taking it out of the variables because these are not variables. Q5A is not a variable. So I've placed a tick in 4 rows in this column for the columns which have the long text answers, and I've removed those ticks from the variables. All these others will be treated by MaxQDA as variables. There's an important little question down here. Do I want to code empty cells? Can I strongly recommend that you leave that empty? Do not code empty cells. I'll explain that when we get in and see the data. Click OK to carry this through. It now focuses for a moment on the 9 variables, the 9 closed questions. Because we can change the type, most of these are text variables, but this, how secure is your job, is a scaled numeric variable, so I'm going to change that to an integer variable, and then we can treat that as a proper number. Now I click on the import, and MaxQDA carries through and does the actual import process. There are 191 documents, so it's counting up to the 191, and it's done it. It gives a little summary, just telling me what it's done, how many code documents it found, how many variables, and significantly 0 on the ignored documents. If you get a positive figure on ignored documents, it means that some of the data it could not interpret properly. Before you go through with your analysis, you probably need to go back to your spreadsheet if you get a positive figure there and look for something that might have caused a problem. You can copy this if you want to store it and reproduce it in your report or what have you. I'm going to close it for now. So now we've got some data on the screen. Here in the top left panel is the document system. We've got a group of documents under the heading survey. That was what I created with that first column that I inserted and copied the word survey down. That created this effect of a group header and all of these 191 respondent values under that survey. Over here, the number indicates how many questions each person answered. If I click on respondent 4, their data comes up in the document browser. They just answered question 2 and question 5A. If I had ticked the code empty cells, all of these would show 4, and I would have 2 extra coded rows here with no data in them. This is quite handy to be able to see who actually answered all 4 questions. Here's a goody-goody, respondent 003 answered all of our questions. Similarly, down here in the code system, MaxQDA, as part of the import routine, has created a code for each of the 4 text questions using the label that was the top row of the Excel's workbook. And you can see those labeled over here. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to add one extra tip here. I'm going to do a right-click to get the context menu and open the code memo for this question, because in here I'm going to type the actual wording of the question. Please expand on your understanding of who or what is at fault. That was the question. One little typing mistake there. Close that. Now, in MaxQDA, when you get one of these memos, by hovering your mouse pointer over it at any stage in the program, you can read the memo. So all through the analysis, I can keep on reminding myself of the precise wording of the question. That's very, very useful in this kind of work, because there are times when you're quite surprised when you're reading an answer and thinking, what question did this person think they were actually answering? So I would at this point fill in all 4 questions, but for speed, I'm just going to stop at that. I'm now going to activate all of the survey documents with a control click in the document system, and I'm going to activate this one question, whose fault? Expand on your idea of whose fault was the economic crash, basically. 48 people answered this question, so now I've got 48 texts here in my retrieve segments panel, and for the next little while, this is the data that I want to work with. Just the answers to one question. I'm going to ignore question 2, question 4a, and question 5a and concentrate on this question 3a because it's a size that we can handle within the constraints of this 45-minute webinar. So I now have a choice as to how to work. I could still work in the full qualitative approach, case by case, by going through my respondents one at a time up here, reading all of their answers and working out how to code them and analyze them and think about them one at a time. Or down here in the Retrieve Segments panel, I can concentrate on one question, whose fault was the crash? I can read their answers all to the one question and focus on that, irrespective of who has contributed it, and think of it that way. This is where I'm referring to that case-by-case or question-by-question approach. I'm going to go for one question and concentrate on that. Now, MaxQDA gives us, in the analysis ribbon, a special new tool. This is a new function in MaxQDA 2018. We've only had it for 4 months, which allows you to look at these one at a time, read them and think about them and code them. But I'm going to show you some shortcuts, so I'll come back to that a little bit later. The first thing I'm going to show you is the word cloud on the Retrieved Segments toolbar here. If I click on this button here, I can see a word cloud, an analysis of the frequencies or the most frequently used words out of the 48 answers to this one question. The bigger the font, the more frequently used the word. Now, I know there are a lot of unused words, useless words in there. I'll come back to that in a moment. For now, I can see the word banks. Whose fault was the economic crash? And banks looks like the biggest answer here. So I click on that, and that opens up a search window, which searches through all of those 48 answers and gives me all of these references These are actual segments of data. I can make the thing wider. The keyword is in the middle. I can see a little bit of context before and a little bit of context afterwards. This one, the word banks, is the first part. Oh, okay, there's a word in front, Tories-banks. It takes that as the beginning of the segment. The hyphen or dash has slightly confused it. I could consider these all carefully, but I'm just going to go ahead and straight away auto-code this because this is a strong answer. So I'm going to create a code called banks. I'm going to give it a color, brown. I'm going to create a code memo because I'm going to record the fact that I auto-coded this for the word banks. Okay, I've created a code. Now it asks me, how much text do I want to apply the code to? I'm going to make an important decision here. I'm going to code the whole paragraph. All of the response to this question will get the code. If I'm really interested in how many times individuals have mentioned the word banks, I should only code the search string, and then I'll get a separate code for each banks hit. But I'm going to go for the paragraph, and once they've been coded once, that'll do me. Who has mentioned banks? I don't care how many times they complain about the banks in their answer. So that auto-codes it. I get 18 segments. There were 20 hits originally. In 2 places, somebody has mentioned banks twice within their answer. That's the explanation of that. Now, because of all these incorrect words, it's not looking too good at the moment, but I've got another way I can look at it. I can change to word frequencies, and this has listed all of the words in the 48 answers in descending order of frequency. Here I can see my word banks. So if I highlight banks and then change the order to alphabetical and scroll down till I find the highlighting, I can see that there were also bankers was used. So I can search on that, and that finds the 5 cases where people talked about bankers. And I can code that also to the banks. So that's already there. I can add it to the paragraph, and I can auto-code that to banks. So that's added another 4. There must be one was perhaps already coded there. And I can also do the same with banking. Find that one, add that one, code to the paragraph, and there we go. And that's done that one as well. So that's finished with banks. Go back to frequency, scroll up near the top, and look for the next useful word. And I come to the word bonus. So now again, I can do a search for this. Now I'm adding more. I can create a new code now for bonus. I'm going to call it bonuses. I should have used that as the default color. Okay, I could put the auto-coded memo in, but I'm getting a bit short of time, so I'm going to skip over that and auto-code that. Oh, we only got 1 for that. Let's just sort alphabetically again and scroll down till we find bonuses. Oh, many more there. Okay, so search for that and code those to bonuses, paragraph, and you see a way of working. I'm getting quite a bit of data done. Let me close that. But we can refine this. We have a stop list. So I can exclude words that I don't want. So if I click on this, and I can choose to exclude the word the, because I can see over here that's the biggest word that I don't want. And I can exclude the word a, because that's no good to me. I can exclude I. And fairly laboriously, I can go through excluding words in this way. When I click OK, watch the word cloud change. We should certainly lose that big bold the. Yep, the word cloud has changed. Do I get any more possibilities in here? Well, I can do that even better if I go back into the word frequencies. And on this, if I double click here, I can get a little no entry, and I can choose to exclude to and it and we and of and is and on and so. Let's choose a whole lot. Close that. I'll need to close and rerun the word cloud, but it should be even more improved now. I missed and. I should have excluded and. Well, never mind. Now I can see more hits. Europe. Okay, let's search for that. Let's autocode. We're blaming Europe. Oh dear, I did say this was a survey that was done in the UK and in about 2011. So perhaps there were the seeds of Brexit were being shown as early as that in research work of this kind, even though it's fictitious. Okay, I'm going to close all these, but we've done a fair bit of work already. I've got 3 codes: Europe, bonuses, and banks. But I could work a bit faster if you're lucky enough to have a bit more budget and you're able to buy the MaxQDA Plus program and have the MaxDictio module, because this has got more powerful tools working in the same direction. If I look in the word frequencies tool now, I get more options as I create my word frequency table. I do need this only in the retrieve segments to limit it to the contents of the retrieve segments panel. But now I can have extra options, like I can choose to exclude all 3-letter words and only have 4-letter words if I want. The danger of that is that little words in English like job will be cut off, but might be very significant in your research. So you've got to be a little bit careful about cutting off the very small words. But I've also got a lemmatise function, which will group together words which all share a common stem. So let's have a look at how this comes up when I run this. It'll look very similar to the other version. I find it slightly easier to have the word frequency alongside. I think we've done Europe and so on. We find the bankers and so on. The euro. Ah, yes, the euro. Let's look at that. We can search for that very much as before. We can create another code for the euro, blaming the euro for the economic crash. It doesn't make a great deal of sense to me. Okay, but there we are. We code it to the paragraph consistently, and we've got another 2. So that's how we can use some extra power, but we've got more things in MaxDictio. We can search for phrases. We can look for phrases of 2 or 3 words. I'm just going to accept the defaults, and let's see what comes up in this little search. Oh, something's leaping off here. Too complicated. Let's search for that. Things just got too complicated. Banking sector is too complicated. Oh, I think I'll have that. So let's create a code for that. Complicated, or okay, complicated. I might have called it complex. Still got the same default color. Okay, to the paragraph, and so we go on. Another 4 segments coded. Be aware that you can use in MaxDictio a dictionary tool, which will allow you, if you're going to do lots of surveys, or particularly several waves of a longitudinal study, using the same categorization, then you can create all of your codes, set them up in a dictionary, and then using the autocode with dictionary, we could autocode all of these things in one go. If we took the trouble of putting into a dictionary, I could code euro, Europe, bonuses, and banks all in one command with that the next time I do the survey. But it does take a bit of work. Right. We've now got quite a long way. I need to do a little administrative step. I need to make all of these codes subcodes of my question here. So I'm just going to drag banks down and make it a subcode of comments fault. Then bonuses comes underneath the banks, Europe underneath bonuses, and euro underneath Europe. And there we are. I've got my question code and I've got some subcodes set up here. So very quickly, it's before your very own eyes. I've done quite a lot of work already. I now need to go back to my analysis ribbon and refine and polish it. And this is where the new Categorize Survey Data tool comes into use. I click on this. It says drag and drop a code of a survey question. So I bring in the Q3A code across here and click OK. And MaxQDA now opens up a whole new panel. And this is where things start to get really exciting. In the middle, I've got the 48 full text responses of the answers to question 3A, whose fault was it? And I can see their IDs over here. And I've also got indications over here of the thematic coding that has already been done. So where it's been coded to banks and bonuses and Europe and so on, that's showing up in this code. And I've got my code structure here. What I'm interested at first is the segments that haven't got any code at all. Let's look at this one. Someone saying, I'm depressed. The ordinary person has no power. Everyone shouts and screams. No one can actually do anything. think about that. I'm going to create a new code, which I'm going to call helpless. This person feels helpless. I'm going to keep it with the default color, brown. I could give it a code memo, but I'm short of time, so I'm going to click OK. A new code has been created. By dragging this onto that code, I can apply the code to it. There we are. My helpless code has appeared. That's now got something. This one, oh, what happened to my, oh, I forgot to bring my too complicated code in. Sorry, I've just got to quit here. And I missed a code, didn't I? Oh. I clicked that somewhere. Bring my complicated in. It should have been in there. Oh, no, not as a subcode, but as a sibling. Right. Once again, open up my categorize, comments fold, OK. There's the too complicated. Sorry, little mistake I made when I was sorting out my codes. So I can go on down. Here's Greece. Greece, they covered up their debt. I think I'm going to add that to the Europe code, so I can add Europe to that, and that's coded that one. And so it goes on. So in this way, I can code manually and refine my coding. If I decide that something isn't right, say I want to change this one, I want to remove the complicated code, I can click on that little X box and the complicated code goes away from that one, but actually I want to keep it, so I'm going to put it back on. But that was just to demonstrate how you can uncode if you spot a mistake. So in this way you can refine your coding. When you're ready to go, click on the quit button and it will store all of those changes in your code system. One last check you might want: if you've got a lot of data, you've collected literally hundreds if not thousands of responses, and you're relying much more on the automated features, how do you identify the uncoded ones? For this you need a complex coding query. So I'm going to go to the complex coding query function and I'm going to choose the complex coding query only one code. I've activated all of my question and all of my current responses to it. And I'm asking MaxQDA to find all the responses which are only coded once and once only. That will be with the question code. It finds 14 segments. I click on the start. Now here in my retrieve segments, I've got just 14 answers. These are all the ones that are not yet coded. So now I can think about these and coding manually in here, or I could auto-code them with an as yet uncoded code and then go back into my categorized survey data. But now it's time to look at reporting. I'm going to reset my activations and I'm going to go to my home and I'm going to open an existing project which is fully coded, so that we can look at how to report the consequences of all that work. You might ask, at what point do you stop refining your code system? I would simply say when you're no longer finding any new themes and when you're no longer finding many mistakes that you want to correct, then it's probably time to stop. But just check that you have coded, do that last global emissions check. Have I got everything? So now here we are. Sometime later, I've got my full data here. If I run the check again, let's just activate all of these and look at my complex coding query for the only one code. I get 0. Everything has been coded at least once, so that's fine. I know I've got that. Reset this. Okay, so now I want to report my results. I'm going to go to the more quantitative end. If I activate this question and its responses and look on the analysis ribbon at the code frequencies, I can report. If I can paste in all the activated codes, I don't actually want the question code for this, so I'm going to remove it. So those two little clicks, I've got my list of all of the refined coding responses. I can limit it to selected documents with activation here. Click OK. And here is my table. Now I've not only got the same frequencies as you can see there in the code system panel, but I've got percentages. And I've got two percentages: the percentage of the 48 people who answered the question and the percentage valid, which is the percentage of the 191 cases who were confronted with the whole survey. I can display this as a chart. Personally, I find it slightly easier to work with the horizontal bar chart for this. I wonder if I can make that a little bit bigger. Can I? No, I don't think I have a means of doing that. Hopefully you can see that reasonably well on your screen. I've got a lot of control of the content here. I can choose to show counts or percentages. I can change the colors with this. I can choose different color schemes. I can change the order if I go back to my table. If I want to have these in alphabetical order, I've resorted the table into alphabetical order and now come back to the chart, and it now looks very different, but these are coming up that way, sorted alphabetically. I can change my header or remove the header and change the text and so on. You've got the full possibilities of formatting this to your heart's content, and with this button you can export this and save it as a PNG image file in particular in order to incorporate it into a presentation or a report. Or if I go back to the table, I can export this into an Excel table, Excel workbook, in order to work on it in other ways if I want, or report it and print it from that. It's also got print functions. So any panel that you can see these export functions, you can export them. So that's how we can report on my qualitative data, my open-ended questions. But let's go back to the variables. Remember the 9 variables that we brought in, the 9 closed questions? If I go to the variables ribbon and open up the data editor for those, here is looking very much like the Excel workbook that we brought this from. We've got a column for each of the closed question variables. We've got their titles across the top exactly as they appeared in the first row of the Excel workbook. It's brought the numeric variable to the front. Oh dear, I didn't mean to do. Oh no, I just sorted. That was all I've done. Sorry, sorted on. Come back to sorting in ascending order. That's the numeric variable. What can we do with these? Well, I'm going to close that and I'm going to look first of all at the document variable statistics, and I'm going to bring in a whole bunch of these into the selected variables by highlighting them on there and moving them over and to the right. I can restrict it to activated documents. I can click OK, and I can start looking at tables. Their employment status. Now these are all 191 cases. That total there, the total 191. So 44% of the people were employed, 5.2% were unemployed, 14% self-employed, 20% retired, and so on. I can look at another variable, family, how many has got children, marital status, age group. These I might need to resort to get them into a sensible order. If I want to look at the pattern of age groups, I can see I've got quite a variable number. Let's just look at these as actual numbers of cases. So the largest group are the 60-year-olds. We've got 58 of them out of the 191 are in their 60s, only 1 in the 70s. The 50-year-olds, much fewer at 19, the 40-year-olds 51. So we've got a lot of variability. That'll become significant when I want to look at age as an impact on my data. And I just want to look at the job secure. This is my numeric variable, a scaled variable. How secure do you feel in your job on a scale of 0 to 4? We've got this pattern. So some people are very insecure. Some people are quite secure, and we've got a slightly strange pattern. This little button I can actually open up and I can see some descriptive statistics on this variable. So I got mean and standard deviation and so on that I can do from there if I want. So lots of things we can do with those variables. But now the most interesting thing, I think, is to put them all together. If I go for mixed methods and use the crosstab function, I can actually combine some of my variable data with some of my open question data. And this is where things get really exciting. So I'm going to open up the crosstab function. I've got one prepared here because it can be a little bit fiddly with the age group, bringing them in one at a time. You can sometimes insert all the variable conditions in one go. I might, if somebody asks me to demonstrate that, just show you that later on. But I've set up the 6 age groups in ascending order by age. That's the first part. So this is defining the columns of the table I'm about to describe. There'll be a column for each age group. But I want to restrict it to activated codes, my one question 3a that I've been focusing on in all this demonstration. So I put a tick in the only for activated codes, and that'll limit the question data. Click OK. It goes away and calculates, and here is the response. To make it a little bit more digestible, I'm just going to drag these columns across to make them narrower. They're slightly generous with the column width, so I can't see all of them on the screen. But if I bring them across like this, now we can see a little bit better. Okay, across the bottom, in the bottom row, we have the 191 cases of the survey. And remember from my chart, when I looked at the age variable, I said most of them were in their 60s, only one in the 70s, rather fewer in their 50s, but quite a lot in their 40s. So there's that pattern, and it's showing with percentages as well. Let's look at the question, the 48 responses to this question. They're spread in this way. So the 20-year-olds, 14.6% compares to 12. Well, that's pretty close. The 30-year-olds, 22.9 against 19. That's pretty close. The 40-year-olds, 20.8% to 26. A little bit different, a little bit down. The 50-year-olds, 10.4 to 9, very close. 29.2 to 30, that's very close. The 70-year-old, well, only one. We're not really going to count the 70-year-old anyway. So that's quite reassuring. For this question, whose fault, the 48 people seem to be spread roughly in the same proportions as the overall sample. Let's now look at the banks. Who was blaming the banks, and thinking how that spread in terms of age groups. So I'm looking at row percentages across here for the banks. Out of the 26 responses to banks, so the numbers behind these total 26, I can see that 7.7% of the 20-year-olds, that's below their percentage for this question. 15.4% of the 30-year-olds, that's below their one for this question. The 40-year-olds are slightly above at 26%, but they're very close to their overall percentage in the whole interview sample. The 50-year-olds are over. 11.5 is over 10.4 and over 9. The 60-year-olds even more. 34.6 is well above 29 and 30, and the 70-year-old. So I think this shows that there is an age effect. The younger people were less likely, slightly less likely to blame the banks. The older people were slightly more likely to blame the banks. So we're starting to get an interpretation of our data which is based on partly our variable data and partly our open questions. I think that's rather exciting. Let me go back to my presentation and just summarize what I've done. So after importing the data, I activated all of the survey documents and a single questions code. That brought the data for one question into play. I could then use the word cloud if I only had MaxQDA standard program, or MaxDictio if I have the MaxQDA Plus program. Either of these I could use in different ways to identify keywords and themes, and that's where stop lists and things come in to help tidy it up. And in MaxDictio I can use phrase searches and dictionaries for auto-coding quickly for lots of times. I, in all cases, follow through with a lexical search and auto-coding to get those keywords and themes turned into codes. When I've done that for quite a lot of data, I come out of those tools, MaxDictio and the cloud, and I use the categorized survey data to refine and improve my coding and various things to check for errors and omissions. When I get to the end of that, I'm no longer finding any new information. I then use I'm ready to report. Analysis code frequencies report the summaries for each question. The document statistics, document variable statistics gives me the summaries for each variable, and mixed methods crosstabs allows me to put all of the data together. I'll sign off by saying they have a saying at MaxQDA: research is a journey, travel it well. And that's what I'd wish for each and every one of you in your research journeys. Oh, I forgot to mention this. There is a free version of the program that you can download from MaxQDA. The same website as you found this webinar. Look for the download trial version and you can have a play with it yourself. It's great having you along this afternoon. Thank you very much, and good luck.